I'm on the road with my disabled son. He gets very noisy sometimes, even though at the moment he's pretty quiet. But you see, us lawyers, there's one thing about us. When you have a profession where you have to use your mind, you are always working. Now, I am not representing anybody in the Markel murder case, but I am deeply involved in the coverage of the case. And I think about both sides of the case, what arguments each side would want to make. What arguments would be made on behalf of Catherine McManua, and what arguments would the state make, or should the state make, to win this case? Easy does it. Easy does it. So, having just done a video about a motion filed by Catherine McManua that talks about some of the argument that was made to the jury in the first trial about Catherine McManua's guilt, I decided to think, well, I decided to come up with my own argument based on vague memories of the case. But I've been covering it for so long now that a lot of it is ingrained in my brain. And I think about this tragic situation quite often. So here we go. I'm going to make it very simple, short, to the point. We all know, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that what we're here today is because a family decided to engage in a murder for hire plot in order to get Wendy Adelson and her kids out of Tallahassee and back in South Florida with the rest of the family. They wanted to get rid of the problem. The problem was Dan Markel. Dan Markel had his own thoughts about how the kids should be raised, which differed significantly from how Wendy and her family thought the kids should be raised. But more importantly, Dan Markel wanted to be a part of his kids' lives, and he had a job here in Tallahassee. And so he did not want, at least in the short term, for Wendy and the kids to move to South Florida. Wendy wanted to be in South Florida with her family and friends, with a fun, cool life of South Florida, Miami. And her family, her parents, her younger brother, or middle brother, Charlie, they wanted her back. They wanted to spend time with their kids, right? Their nephews for Charlie, the grandkids for Donna and Harvey. They wanted to spend time with their precious Wendy. So they decided to get rid of the problem, and the problem was Dan Markel. And they decided to do it in the evil way, which is to simply murder the problem. Of course, anytime that you want to do something like that, there are a lot of risks involved. In a murder for hire plot, the biggest risk is that the people who you hire to commit the murder are either going to take advantage of you, they might take your money and not do it, or they may get caught. And if they get caught, they will trade your freedom for their freedom. So they'll spill the beans. They'll tell who hired them, how much they were paid, etc., etc. Why? Because they want to be out. And they know that the state and the family involved, or families of the victims, if there's more than one victim, they would want the people who order the hit to be put to justice. The hitmen obviously will have some justice, but the hitmen have good bargaining chip. They know the identity of who hired them. If they do. That's why in many novels where there are murder for hire plots, there's an intricate way in which the hitman gets hired without really knowing who is hiring him or her. And the same goes both ways. The hitmen don't want the people hiring them knowing who they are, because they're worried about the fact that they're loose ends. There's a big issue of trust, or lack of trust, when it comes to do a murder for hire plot. The way to get around that is what was done in this case. Let's put it this way. You know the theory that the state came here to prove to you. The theory is that there are, in essence, three teams. Team A would be the people who order the hit. Team B would be the middle woman, Catherine McManua, that we charged as co-conspirator, the person who hired Sigfredo Garcia to commit the murder. And then Team C would be the hitman. Team A needs Team B to protect the anonymity of Team A. Who's going to be exposed the most in this conspiracy? It's going to be Team C. Team C is going to be out there. They're going to be trying to commit the murder. They can be caught at any moment. They can be caught on the scene. They can run out of gas and the cops catch up to them. They can leave evidence. There may have been cameras they were not aware of, etc., etc. So there's a chance that they can be caught. And so that poses a problem for Team A, because if they get caught, again, Team A would be the bargaining chip. If the hitmen give up Team A, they can get awesome deals. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have presented a lot of evidence of the direct involvement of Catherine McManua in this case. She would be the sole member of Team B. She would be the security blanket between Team A and Team C that protects Team A in the case of Team C getting caught, which eventually is what happened here. And therefore, without Team B, if there was no Team B at all, then you would know. Luis Rivera would have known exactly who hired them. Sigfredo Garcia too would know who hired them. And you can imagine that Team A would be very nervous that Sigfredo Garcia would turn him in. The risk would be so high as to probably not go forward with such a plan. However, with Team B present, and on top of that, the fact that Team B and Team A and Team C, the person directly hired to commit the hit, have a relationship, they have kids together, the two people hired are gangsters, they're not supposed to talk, they live by a code, but on top of that there's an extra security blanket, and that is the relationship between Sigfredo Garcia from Team C and Catherine McManua from Team B. They both have kids together. Sigfredo gets caught. He's not going to talk against Catherine McManua. He's going to do everything possible to make sure that the mother of his children is not involved in this prosecution, is not convicted of this heinous crime. He will want to try to make sure that the woman that he loved and that he had kids with will still be able to go back home and raise the kids. Therefore, there's no incentive whatsoever for Team C to spill the beans on Team B. And guess what? Team B will be the only person that knows exactly the identity and the details of who hired her to then hire Team C. There are several potential people who may have hired Team B. Could have been Charlie, could have been Donna, could have been Wendy, could have been Harvey, Could have been all of them. Could be some of them. The best evidence of who hired her would probably be her testimony. And once she gives that testimony, one would try to corroborate and see if there are things that make sense and that establish that that's true. That whatever she says as to who hired her makes sense. So what we have here is that Team C has already been convicted. Luis Rivera has talked, but his knowledge was limited. It was limited only to knowing whatever information was provided to him and Sigfredo from Sigfredo and Team B, Catherine Magbanua. So the little knowledge that he had was that this was being done to help a woman obtain custody of her kids. In other words, help Wendy, number one. And number two, he has direct knowledge of the direct involvement of Wendy because he was participating in all of this, and Sigfredo and Wendy, I'm sorry, excuse me. He has direct knowledge of the participation of Catherine Magbanua because throughout the two trips, especially the second trip, Sigfredo Garcia and Catherine Magbanua were on the phone quite often, and they were exchanging information about the hit. He also was able to provide additional details about how this whole hit happened that law enforcement was not even aware about, and that therefore helped establish that Luis Rivera was telling the truth, at least as to the main components of what happened. Is it possible that he embellished a little bit the role of the other people involved and undermined a little bit his role? He's sworn to tell the truth. He knows that if he lies to you, he could lose this entire deal. He's obviously doing because he wants to be able to see his kids again. He wants to be able to be out of jail again. Certainly he has an incentive to lie because he got a deal out of it. But he also has an incentive to tell the truth because we are investigating. We just don't take his statement for granted. And we have done a lot of legwork to corroborate what he said. And everything that so what he said, and this is the most important testimony, is that obviously Catherine Magbanua was the middle woman. And we therefore did do our legwork, did investigate further, and did determine that yes, there's significant additional evidence on top of the direct testimony of Luis Rivera that Catherine Magbanua was involved in this murder. The evidence is significant. Not only do you have the testimony of Luis Rivera, but you also have everything that happened after the bump operation done by the FBI in Miami when they accosted Donna Adelson and tried to get the conspirators to talk. The conspirators did talk. Conversations went from Donna to Charlie, Charlie to Katie, Katie to Sigfredo, Sigfredo back to Katie. Her testimony here, trial before you, that all those conversations for hours that she was having with Charlie were about something that she did not understand, that he was just blabbing, is an insult to any reasonable juror's capabilities of understanding the evidence. I mean, come on. She spent hours with Charlie after this bump operation took place. Why? If she's not involved, why is Charlie confiding in her and talking about this approach from a law enforcement undercover who he didn't know it was an undercover law enforcement? Why would he discuss the details of a murder for hire plot with a lady who was not involved? Why would he discuss resolving the problem with a lady who was not involved? Why would he use Katie as the middle woman again in between him and Sigfredo Garcia to pass messages along back and forth if she was not involved? Obviously, she was involved. Obviously, the evidence corroborates Luis Rivera's testimony of her direct involvement. So it's not just common sense and logic, and the fact that on Team A, you have smart people. You have a lawyer, you have doctors, dentists, a teacher. These are smart people. They're gonna come up with some way to get this done. Whoever it was that ordered this hit, maybe it was all of them. But they're gonna do it in a way that they're gonna feel the most protected possible. And that's exactly what happened here. There is other evidence that is not as conclusive, but that also supports the pretty clear conclusion that you can make just by using your common sense, right? So your common sense should tell you that the testimony of Luis Rivera makes 100% sense, and that this alternate theory that the defense is trying to suggest to you, that Sigfredo Garcia and Charlie Adelson had a direct deal with each other, makes zero sense, because you know that Charlie would never trust a gangster with this information. He would never trust somebody who's willing to kill Dan Markel with this information, and in essence make himself subject to being extorted for the rest of his life, possibly murdered by the Sigfredo guy, right? I mean, why would he make a deal with a killer that would put him in danger? The smart thing for the Adelsons to do is to do it, not that this is something that Charlie wanted to do and that he would then dump Katie in exchange, but rather that this was something that was being done for money, and it was being done for some good cause, to help a lady who was being abused by her husband. It would probably misrepresent what Dan Markel was doing. They would convince Katie that they were doing something good. There's a horrible human being in Tallahassee that is abusing their precious Wendy and the kids, and he deserves street justice. And they would do it in a way where possibly Sigfredo would think that this was actually ordered not by Charlie, but instead by the parents of Wendy Adelson. That the parents wanted to do it, so that the parents were the ones who approached Katie, because they all knew each other. She was dating Charlie, and she knew the parents. She even supposedly, allegedly, later got to work for the Institute and was paid by the Institute. So she was familiar with his parents. And so the idea would be to put in his mind, one would imagine, what would make sense here, right? We don't have to prove you the exact details, but what makes sense, I'm giving you one version that makes perfect sense, is that Catherine lies to Sigfredo and says, Donna hired me, or Harvey hired me, or both of them hired me. It's possible again that all of them hired her, and that would not be a lie. But I would suggest to you that the smart way for her to go would be to hide Charlie's involvement. It is also possible not that Charlie told Sigfredo that he would dump Katie after the murder. What makes more sense is that Katie would tell Sigfredo, hey, listen, if you do this, I'm not gonna see this guy anymore, because we're probably gonna wanna have some distance from this family, so I'm not gonna be seeing him anymore. So if there was this incident in between the first trip and the second trip that Catherine McBenua testified about, where there was an argument on the street where Sigfredo seemed to be mad and he was screaming at him and Sigfredo, or her and Sigfredo, as they were gonna go somewhere with a little boat that they were towing, or a jet ski. Sigfredo just, more likely was mad at Catherine for still being with Charlie after he had agreed to murder somebody for that family. Probably Sigfredo wanted Katie to be completely already separated from that family to destroy that connection. But anyway, we don't have to speculate on those things. All I want you to do, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is to consider the testimony of Luis Rivera and use your common sense and use logic and use the other evidence you heard about who are the people who ordered this hit, how intelligent they are, and everything that happened after the murder. The fact that then they started to take care of Katie. Why would they do so? So Charlie dumps Katie, but then he starts to give her favors. Obviously, favors that would be easy to ask for if he had just done a huge favor for this family. A favor that maybe you charge too little for, and you think, you know what? Maybe they should help us more. Maybe you don't want to extort them, but you ask them for help, knowing the Adelsons will know that on your side you have two people that are willing to kill. So you call the Adelsons and say, hey, listen, my kids need some health insurance. I need to be on the salary, on a regular salary, so I can afford this insurance coverage. Can you guys help? Of course. Then they call the Adelsons again. Hey, my car is broken down all the time. Do you guys, have a way that you can help me with transportation? I need to be able to take my kids to the doctors and so on and so forth. Of course, we got a nice old Lexus that we can, I think it was a Lexus, that we can have you use. All right, and so on and so forth. You have the increase in income that this lady had exactly around the time of the murder. Okay, sure. Is it possible that there's a huge coincidence that suddenly exactly those 2-3 months after the murder she was dancing at clubs and she was making a killing? Yeah, it's possible. But this is not the evidence that we're relying upon to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that she was involved. But it is an additional piece of evidence that corroborates the direct testimony of Luis Rivera that tells you that she was directly involved. There's that. There's some phone records. There's a ping of the telephones that is consistent with Katie being around the rental car place when the car was being rented for the first trip. So those are all weaker pieces of evidence, but evidence nonetheless that supports the ultimate conclusion that we want you to make in this case, which is that Catherine McManua was the middle woman, was the security blanket, was the only reason why the Adelsons were able to trust two thugs, two gangsters, two killers to commit this murder. It was a woman who was a security blanket in case these guys got caught, that ensured in a sense that they wouldn't talk against them, that allowed them to hire the hitman without the hitman knowing exactly who was hiring them, and that in essence made prosecution of the Adelsons much, much harder. It was a smart plan, and I hope that others don't learn from the Adelsons, but so far it has worked for them, and we are horrified by the fact that we haven't been able to charge them yet. But the reality is that we have a heavy burden and we have to go step by step. And the state has proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt against Sigfredo Garcia. Luis Rivera has confessed to his role. We have proven to you at this trial beyond a reasonable doubt that Catherine McManua is involved. And we'll see where the chips lie next. But the first step, the one that you have to consider today, is whether or not Team A put in place a security blanket, and whether that security blanket for them is Catherine McManua. You heard all of the testimony, all of the evidence that the state has accumulated in an extensive investigation. And we ask you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, to make the only possible conclusion in this case from that evidence. And that is to conclude that Catherine McManua is guilty of all of the crimes she was charged with. Thank you. Until next time. Mentor Lawyer or Georgia Kaplan. Maybe Mentor Lawyer will hire Georgia Kaplan someday. We'll see. Thanks for watching.